What we got here is a failure to communicate.
This is Paul Newman's mansion, the peaceful home, where he once escaped from Hollywood and tried to rediscover himself. But now, the house is filled with nothing but silence and the untold secrets it still keeps. Behind those blue eyes that once captivated the entire world, Paul Newman carried a tragedy so deep that he could never forgive himself. The man once hailed as the perfect American ideal had, in truth, spent his whole life running from a sin he could never erase: forbidden affairs, and even secret relationships with men, shadowed by a grief that followed him until the very end of his life. Those who adored those mesmerizing blue eyes could never have imagined inside the abandoned house lies a haunting truth that tightens the chest and lingers in the soul. Paul Newman, the legend beloved by the entire world, didn't just captivate audiences with his remarkable performances in The Hustler, Cool Hand Luke, or Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. He conquered them with his character, his integrity, and a rare kindness that seemed almost out of place amid Hollywood's glittering excess. With those iconic blue eyes, a calm smile, and that quiet, dignified grace, he made millions fall in love, not merely with his looks, but with the sincerity and humility that radiated from his every gesture. Though he was one of the most recognizable faces in the world, Paul Newman despised fame and spectacle. He once said, "I never want to see my face on a t-shirt." He avoided parties, shunned the spotlight, and found true joy in car racing and cooking rather than on the stage. When he founded Newman's Own, he donated every cent of its profits, over $500 million, to charity. Yet, behind all that success and compassion lay a quiet conflict. A man who seemed to have everything, but who spent his life asking himself, "Do I really deserve it?" That was why he became the perfect embodiment of the American ideal. But only after his death did the truth begin to surface, when his home in Connecticut, along with journals, recordings, and personal papers discovered inside, revealed a different story. Paul Newman's life was not nearly as flawless as the world had believed. On the desk by his window there lay a dark leather notebook, its pages yellowed with age, the manuscript of The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Man. On the very first page, a scrawled confession read, "I drank myself into self-destruction. There were nights heavy with the smell of whiskey, nights when Joanne Woodward went crazy from the stench of alcohol, and hangovers that stretched till dawn. Friends said he could down half a bottle of whiskey just to fill a void he couldn't name. Writer Gore Vidal called him a decent man who was always drunk." Director George Roy Hill put it bluntly, "When Paul gets angry, he's like a bomb waiting to go off." Once, Newman hurled a glass straight into the wall during a party. Another time, he was nearly thrown off the set of HUD because he couldn't even stand straight before the camera. But Hollywood never judged him. He was Paul Newman, the man every woman adored and every man wanted to be. The next pages of his life's diary unveiled a raw truth. In the late 1950 seconds, at the height of his fame, Paul Newman fell into what was deemed an open affair. Behind the scenes of the play Picnic, Newman met Joanne Woodward, a Southern blonde, sharp-witted and daring enough to make people turn their heads. At the time, he already had a wife and 3 small children. Yet, as if pulled by fate, they found each other in those long nights of rehearsals, where the line between performance and reality began to blur. Crew members recalled that they were often the last to leave the stage, driving back to the hotel together, walking side by side down quiet midnight streets. In the dim light of the empty theater, his hand once brushed hers, a fleeting moment, but one that ignited everything. In Hollywood back then, even a whisper of scandal could destroy a career. But Newman didn't hide. He chose to love when he shouldn't have, and perhaps when he couldn't help it. Later, he admitted, "I loved at the wrong time, but I don't regret it." In 1958, he divorced Jackie Witte and married Joanne Woodward, and the public fury that followed was immediate. The press branded him America's most charming betrayer. Men envied him, women were furious, and yet fascinated. One critic wrote, "Paul Newman shattered the very image of the honest man he himself created." Yet behind all the criticism lay another truth. Their love affair was wild, consuming, and drenched in sin. In a private journal entry, Newman once wrote of that time, "We left traces of passion everywhere. Hotels, parks, even rental cars. It was as if every time we touched, we burned a piece of the world away." Joanne Woodward wasn't just his lover, she was the storm that pulled him out of the Hollywood sky and the place where he finally landed. That relationship redefined him, a legend who knew how to love, how to sin, and how to live truthfully in a world built on illusion. But the story didn't end with his affairs with women. In that same journal, the following lines revealed something no one dared to believe. Paul Newman once had secret relationships with James Dean, Marlon Brando, Anthony Perkins, and even Sal Mineo, men who shared the same wild glint in their eyes, the same loneliness hidden behind fame's bright facade. In Brando Unzipped, author Darwin Porter quoted Marlon Brando saying, "Paul Newman had as many on-set affairs as any of us, and he was as bisexual as I was. The difference is, I got caught, he knew how to do everything in the dark." Rumors spread quickly, especially among those in the early Hollywood circles who had known Newman before he became a star. Some journalists in the 1980 seconds claimed that during the screen tests for East of Eden, 1954, he and James Dean had shared a connection that went beyond friendship. No one ever proved it. But when Dean once confessed, "Paul understands me better than anyone else," the words ignited suspicions that never quite faded. Years later, a few crew members would recall moments they said they could never forget. Paul Newman and James Dean, standing close, too close, their eyes locked in a gaze that lingered longer than what was normal between two men. One set worker claimed Dean lightly placed his hand over Paul's, and Paul didn't pull away. In the journal of an assistant director on East of Eden, there was a single line scribbled in the margins. Newman looked at Dean as if he were the only secret in the world. Close friends said Newman kept a small photograph of James Dean in his wallet, folded in half, so worn that the edges blurred the mouth. After Dean's death, he never spoke of him again, but the photo never left his side. After a late-night party in the Hollywood Hills, the two were seen leaving together, disappearing into a car parked in a quiet corner for the rest of the night. A few months later, Marlon Brando's name began surfacing in whispers. It was said that he and Newman once had a private conversation that lasted for hours in a dressing room while performing in a play. When Paul finally stepped out, his eyes carried something new, something unnamed, and something that needed no explanation. Another friend, Anthony Perkins, once hinted in a cryptic interview, "Paul has the most beautiful heart I've ever known, but it's not meant for women." Those fragments, scattered like frames from an old film reel, when pieced together, form another portrait, Paul Newman, the man Hollywood only ever knew halfway. Some claimed they had worked with both him and Dean, insisting there was something between them that didn't need to be said. Others went further. From what I've read, Newman had a physical relationship with James Dean, and maybe even Marlon Brando. Everyone knew, but no one dared to speak. Hollywood at the time was a world built on pretense, where men had to be strong, women had to be gentle, and anything that strayed from the mold was branded a sin. In that world, if those whispers were true, Newman must have lived within two shells, the public hero and the hidden self. Even so, beneath it all, he remained a father burdened with an unhealed wound, the death of his eldest son, Scott Newman, from a drug overdose in 1978. The young man, only 28, had once dreamed of following in his father's footsteps, believing that if he worked hard enough, he could escape the shadow of a legend. He died alone in a quiet Los Angeles apartment, surrounded by the smell of alcohol and sedatives. When Newman received the news, it shattered him. "No loss has ever broken me like this," he wrote in his diary, the trembling of his handwriting as if each word carved a cut into his heart. From that day on, he became unusually quiet. He stopped mentioning Scott's name in public, stopped joking around as before. During interviews, whenever someone accidentally brought up his son, Newman would simply smile, that faraway look in his eyes, as if seeing something no one else could. Many said that after that year, a small crack appeared in those blue eyes that once made the world fall in love, fine, deep, and never healed again. He kept acting, kept smiling, kept giving to charity. But in every role, in every interview, there was a faint trace of a man trying to hide a storm within. That storm had a name: loneliness. The final years of Paul Newman's life unfolded like a slow-motion film. He still drove, still smiled when meeting old friends, but people said his smile no longer reached his eyes. Those blue eyes that once blazed across the silver screen now looked like shallow water reflecting a fatigue no one dared to name. By his 70s, Newman had almost completely withdrawn from Hollywood. He acted less, choosing only projects he believed had real meaning. "If a script doesn't make me think, I have no reason to show up," he once said. During those years, he and Joanne lived quietly in their wooden house in Westport, Connecticut, where the oak trees were blanketed in moss and the sea breeze drifted through open windows. They grew vegetables, kept dogs, and read books. In the mornings, Newman made his own coffee. In the afternoons, he would drive to a nearby town to buy a few groceries for dinner. No paparazzi, no flashbulbs. Just the sound of his footsteps on a gravel path and the cool air of an American autumn. But beneath that peaceful life, his body had begun to speak. In 2007, Paul Newman quietly announced his retirement from acting. In a brief interview, he said, "You start to lose your memory. You start to lose your confidence. You start to lose your invention. So, I think that's pretty much a closed book for me." That moment felt like a soft curtain falling. The man who had lived his entire life in front of the camera was now turning his back on the light, letting the rest of his life drift into silence. People said he quit because his memory was slipping. But everyone knew, perhaps Newman simply wanted to preserve the last fragment of dignity he had left for himself. In May 2008, he stepped down from directing Of Mice and Men at the Westport Country Playhouse, citing health reasons. It was an official farewell, soft as a breath, yet enough for those who truly knew him to understand that the final curtain was near. No flashbulbs, no noise, only the quiet retreat of a giant of film and racing, slowly stepping back as his body began to admit it was no longer ready. Not long after, the news broke publicly. Paul Newman had been diagnosed with lung cancer. Those close to him said that when he found out, he didn't shout, didn't curse fate. He simply sat in silence for a long time, then turned to Joanne and said, "Maybe it's time for us to sit down and watch the last movie of our lives." From then on, he almost vanished from the public eye. In his final months, Newman grew thin quickly. The once strong hands now trembled when holding a glass of water. Friends said that whenever someone came to visit, he still smiled, still joked, but once they left, he would sit quietly, gazing out at the garden behind the house where an old wooden table stood beside a pile of scripts, and the chair where he used to sketch. "I'm not afraid of dying," he once said. "I'm just afraid I haven't done enough." A neighbor recalled that during those last summer days, Newman still drove his old Volvo around the town of Westport. No driver, no bodyguard. He stopped to buy ice cream for 2 children, smiled, and said, "Don't ever grow up too fast." That image, a silver-haired man in a white shirt, holding a vanilla ice cream cone, was the last memory the little town ever had of him. As his health declined, Newman chose to remain in his Westport home. He refused to be hospitalized, wanting to leave this world surrounded by the scent of pine wood and the whisper of wind beneath the eaves. His daughter Clea later shared that on his final night, he didn't say much. He simply looked at his wife, held her hand for a long while, and softly whispered, "You've been the best part of my life." Then, Paul Newman closed his eyes as gently as a passing breeze. On the 26th of September 2008, he passed away at the age of 83. No fanfare, no grand funeral. The family held a private memorial, simple, quiet, and true to the man he had always been. Paul Newman's death shook Hollywood to its core. The press called him the last man of the old generation, the symbol of an era when cinema still had honesty and heart. Hundreds of letters and thousands of tributes poured into the Newman's own foundation. At Times Square, flowers and old photographs were laid beneath his statue. 20th Century Fox lit up its giant marquee through the night with the words, "Thank you, Paul, for the movies and for the humanity." In New York, that same night, every Broadway theater dimmed its lights for one full minute, a rare honor reserved only for the truly great. In that darkness, thousands of people stood in silence, as though bidding farewell to one final performance. Close friends couldn't hide their sorrow. Robert Redford said he had lost a brother, a companion on every road. Sally Field broke down when she spoke of a rare man, strong yet deeply kind. Many stars of the next generation wrote their goodbyes. Some called him an icon. Others said something simpler. He made us want to be better people. Joanne Woodward, the woman who had walked beside him for half a century, never spoke to the press. She left only a small note in the house. He didn't just act, he lived every line. Months later, people said she could often be seen sitting on the porch, reading the old letters Paul had written to her, her voice trembling softly but without tears. In 2009, the charity organization founded by Newman officially reached more than $300 million in donations. Today, that number has surpassed $600 million, a living legacy that was never buried with his body. Perhaps for him, that was the most complete role of all, the role of a good man. Amid the glittering world of entertainment, Newman departed the way he had always lived, quietly, simply, and with kindness. There was no need for ornate eulogies, because anyone who had ever looked into those clear blue eyes on screen already knew how deeply he had loved this life. Those who admired him understood a legend may fade into the silver screen, but his trace still lingers somewhere. In the wind, in the house by the river, like a chapter of a film that never truly ended. If anyone had walked down Maple Avenue in Westport in the years right after 2008, they might remember an unusual sight. There, among ancient trees and quiet meadows, stood a white-painted house nestled beside the Saugatuck River. Large windows, a wide wooden porch, a swimming pool curved like a silk ribbon, and behind it, the barn where Paul Newman once kept his favorite race car. Everything was neat and refined, yet wrapped in a melancholy stillness that made one feel both reverence and unease. This mansion was nothing like the typical Hollywood estates. No gilded ceilings, no sparkling chandeliers, no towering iron gates. It was modest and unpretentious, yet carried the quiet elegance of a man who had reached the very peak of fame without ever needing to prove anything. Newman once said, "I don't need a castle. I just need a place where I can hear the wind in the morning and my heartbeat at night." And that place was Westport. He and Joanne bought the house in the late 1962 when they decided to leave Hollywood to raise their children and search for a quieter life. For them, it was more than just a home, it was a refuge. In the small kitchen, Joanne would often cook her husband's favorite chicken soup. In the living room, a black and white photo of Paul Newman smiling behind the scenes of Cool Hand Luke hung right in the center. Everything had meaning. Every scratch on the wooden table, every book on the shelf was a fragment of memory. After his death, the house remained almost completely empty for a long time. The people of Westport called it the Silent House. No one saw light spilling from its windows anymore. The swimming pool slowly dried. Grass grew thick along the stone path. On some nights, neighbors claimed they could hear faint piano music drifting through the air. the tune of Blue Moon, the song Newman had loved to hear Joanne play. Perhaps it was just the wind, or perhaps it was memory, still echoing. When Joanne's health began to decline, the house turned into a lonely fortress. She lived there with a few caretakers and never allowed journalists to take photos. The doors stayed closed. Neighbors said that sometimes a small truck from a charity would arrive and leave quietly. No one knew what it brought in or took away. Only after Joanne was diagnosed with advanced Alzheimer's did the house slowly fall into a kind of winter sleep. A journalist once wrote, "Paul Newman's house looks as if it's waiting for something, perhaps for its owner to come home." And strangely, that feeling remains even now, when one stands before the old wooden gate. Though the roof tiles have darkened and the fence leans with age, the air around the house still carries an elegance, calm, graceful, unmistakably his. Newman's study remains untouched. The walls are covered with film scripts, racing photographs, and notes he once scribbled in pencil. Never forget who you are. Don't believe in praise. Believe in what you do. On his desk lies a small card that reads, "Joanne, the love of my life. No one has had the heart to move it." The garden behind the house holds the deepest memories. At its center stands a small well, about which Newman once joked, "If I ever fall in, at least I'll get to hear the water sing." The maple trees he planted with his children have grown tall, casting long shadows over the path that leads to the riverbank. At sunset, the last light glimmers on the water's surface before fading behind the woods, like the closing frame of a slow, silent film. After 2010, the Newman family began opening the house occasionally for charity events and small memorial gatherings. Part of the grounds was used to host fundraising galas for children with serious illnesses, a cause he had always cherished. They never allowed cameras inside, but guests who attended said the interior remained exactly as it had been when he was alive. His racing helmet hung beside the leather jacket, his old Volvo parked in the garage, and a small wooden sign by the door that read, "Welcome, but be kind." What's remarkable is that while many Hollywood legends' homes have become noisy tourist attractions, Paul Newman's house remains an exception. His family has refused to turn it into a monument. They want the place to keep living, not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder of his kindness. In one rare interview, his daughter said simply, "My father didn't want people to come and take pictures of the walls. He wanted them to come and help someone, the way he always did." And so, from that old house, the quiet fundraising dinners still take place. Children, philanthropists, and Paul's old friends gather every year to light candles and share stories. They talk about the times he drove food deliveries to charity centers, about the way he made sick children laugh in hospital corridors. One close friend said, Paul could turn any room into a stage, but his house was different there. He was just himself. Today, Westport remains peaceful. Travelers passing through see only an old house. But for those who knew him, who loved him, who once watched him on screen, it is a place where time stands still. A house that feels like a metaphor for his life. Not lavish, not boastful, but filled with humanity and the traces of a beautiful soul. Outside, the maple trees still shed red leaves every autumn. The pond still mirrors the sky. And if you stand still long enough, as the breeze drifts softly across the porch, you might hear something, maybe the faint hum of a distant race car engine, or simply the sigh of a legend who never truly left this place. Few people know that besides the Westport estate, Paul Newman had another retreat, a small wooden house set amid the cold ocean air of Martha's Vineyard. No fence, no grand gate, just the smell of sea salt and the wind sweeping through the tall pines. The wooden walls are sun-bleached, the window frames painted white, and the porch faces the sea where he would sit for hours, watching the sun fall into the water as if watching his own life slowly fade. He bought that house in the late 1962, when fame surrounded him, but his mind began to crack under its weight. Hollywood then gleamed like a stage that never went dark, and Newman, weary of having to be perfect all the time, came to Martha's Vineyard to hide. "I needed to hear myself again," he said. And there, among dirt roads and the smell of wet grass, he truly did. On the island, he wasn't a star. He was an aging man with silver hair, driving an old car, stopping by a small fish shack by the bay, greeting the vendor with a quiet smile. In the mornings, he made coffee and sat on the porch, watching the mist lift. In the evenings, he drank beer, scribbled a few lines, or simply listened to the wind brushing over the roof. One neighbor said, "Once, I saw him sit for 3 hours without moving, as if afraid that if he stood up, something inside him might break." After his son's death, Newman returned there more often. The house became a refuge for his grief. He brought with him a few old photographs, a worn leather jacket, and a small notebook filled with words no one could decipher. They said the light inside the house glowed late into the night, faint through the windows as soft as breathing. Some said he was writing. Others said he was crying. Perhaps both were true. It was here, too, that the idea for Newman's Own was born, the brand he turned into his way of atoning with the world. From that tiny kitchen, he mixed the first batches of salad dressing and decided to give away every penny of profit. "If I've taken too much," he wrote, "then it's time to give something back." Today, the house on Martha's Vineyard still stands, moss-covered porch, shuttered windows, and a wooden chair still facing the ocean. When the wind passes through and the waves crash against the rocks, locals say that sometimes a faint light flickers inside at night. Small, but enough to make passers-by stop. As if Paul Newman were still sitting somewhere in the dark, quietly watching the sea balanced on that thin line between peace and regret. What Paul Newman left behind was more than immortal performances. It was the story of a man brave enough to live truthfully, with both the light and the darkness inside him. A legend who reached the heights of art, yet carried in his heart the scars of choice, passion, and guilt. Was it worth trading freedom for fame, or does true happiness only come when we dare to live as who we really are? What do you think about Paul Newman? Leave a comment below. I hope you found this video meaningful. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and join me again as we uncover more stories behind the glow of Hollywood.